It's no secret that I'm a fan of horror. The first video I made after the break I took at the end of last summer was titled Horror in Video Games. And now that I've finished my second break, which wasn't exactly planned, I figured why not share what I thought of the latest installment in the Resident Evil franchise, Resident Evil 8. I have a lot to say because I thoroughly enjoyed this game. Sure, it's got some mixed responses over just how horror this horror game feels, but I think Capcom nailed it for the most part. I've played through the game 3 times now, and I'm in that speedrun mode I always get into with Resident Evil games once I've beaten them for the first time. This isn't a completely spoiler-free review. I can't remember exactly what I put in the script, it's quite long, but if there is anything when I'm editing that I think will be spoilery, I'll include a timestamp of what you should skip to. But for the most part, I really only talk about gameplay and performance and how it stacks up against Resident Evil 7. But in terms of story discussion, I'll probably do a follow-up video talking about what I thought about the story because there's a lot in that and I really want to get into it. I think it's safe to argue that the most important part of a game can be its gameplay. Not always, but for Resident Evil Village, a lot of people will agree here. The internet has been quite split on if the story was good or not. I'm in the camp that loved the story except the ending, but for the people not so sold on the game's story premise, it puts a lot more focus on the gameplay. And how does the gameplay feel? I think it's fantastic. I'm not the biggest fan of Resident Evil 6. I've played a few hours of it and it's a fine game, but it's not what I'm looking for in a Resident Evil game. I enjoy Resident Evil 4, it's obviously a classic, and Resident Evil Remake for the GameCube is a good game to me, but it's just hard as hell for somebody born in 2003 that grew up with a Wii and a PS3. But Resident Evil 7, that was my introduction to the series, and that style is my bread and butter when it comes to Resident Evil. Then, of course, the remakes of 2 and 3 closely follow 7's style, just with that third person camera angle. 8's gameplay just builds on this in a way that I was originally fairly skeptical of. I mean, from what I could gather from playing the 2 demos that came out for Village was that the inventory was going to be significantly bigger in comparison to 7 and the remakes, and that the crafting system was appreciably overhauled. It's not just chem fluids, gunpowder, and herbs anymore. Now you've got scrap. Those are the surface level obvious changes, and I'm going to keep referring to the differences between 8 and 7 because 7 is the closest thing we can compare this to. However, when I got deeper into the actual game, the changes did become more apparent, and this is where things got controversial. Some people, myself included, welcomed the changes Capcom made, and others felt a little left in the dark. I'll explain. From start to finish, Resident Evil 7 is without a doubt pure survival horror. From the jump scare you get in the initial house from Mia lunging out at you from the basement to the grotesque final boss. That game and what they did was near flawless. The Bakers were really developed, shocking characters. The whole idea of the mold changing them and turning them into superhumans was terrifying, and every scare put into the game got me. I've played 7 a lot. It's quite possibly my favorite third party game of the 8th generation, and I have a lot more to say about it, so really and truly I should make a whole separate video on Resi 7. Now, if they found a way to replicate that start to finish haywire horror they gave us in 2017 in this Village setting, then everyone would have been singing the praises of Village. I'm not saying this game reviewed poorly, because it reviewed quite well, but there were certainly uncertain people playing Resi 8. This game can be considered more tame, to put it bluntly, but I don't fully agree with everyone who says that, because sure, it's more tame in the scare factor, but the thrill factor is nuts. The pressure and panic you get from sections of this game are unreal. Instead of the constant fear I had in 7, I had constant adrenaline and anxiety playing the majority of 8. I consider 7 to be a slower, more, oh god, oh please, no, I'm scared, I don't want to go around this corner, and I consider 8 to be more of a please stop chasing me. I'm a little baby, but I'll shoot you up. Just you wait and see. And then sprinkle in some adrenaline like no other game you've played before. And there are certainly still some good scares. And you've got Resident Evil 8. And yeah, it is different, but it isn't done poorly, so I welcome it. Part of me does wish it was scarier, sure. But look at all the Resident Evil games. Consistency isn't exactly their strong points, so I just don't expect it anymore. I mentioned the larger inventory space as being one of the things that I noticed in the demo. Yep, it's definitely an inventory that's larger. Some people will go, oh, this isn't very survival horror-y, and they would be right. But yet again, I don't dislike this decision. There is a larger focus on huge action set pieces with massive bosses and lots of areas with lots of enemies. So you're not carrying all that ammo with Ethan's inventory from 7, are you? That thing was tiny. There is more ammo at your disposal, but obviously this is a direct correlation to there being more enemies. So yeah, of course there is. Aside from a smaller emphasis on puzzles compared to the already small emphasis on puzzles that 7 had, 8 is pretty similar. Obviously, they kept that sweet, sweet first person perspective that I love in Resi games. However, I honestly felt it was a little cliche that Ethan was looking for his daughter this time, when last time he was looking for his wife. But that isn't super relevant to gameplay, and I'll get to my thoughts on that in a bit. The final big change to gameplay is how crafting works, and this is actually a pretty big overhaul. Traditionally, you've got your chem fluid, herbs, and different types of gunpowder, etc., etc. Now you've just got one type of herbs, your gunpowder, one type of chem fluid, and you have different types of scrap. This adds a new layer to crafting that wasn't there before, and honestly, I really like this change. That may be because it's easier to make things and you don't have to remember the recipes, but hear me out. Now you've got this table, more resources to choose from, and a really clear visual representation of what you can and cannot craft. I feel like having this separate screen for crafting makes the player take more time to think about how they're going to use their ingredients and makes it less of a snapshot decision. Instead of going, I need ammo right now, or I need healing right now, you go into the crafting menu and use it to plan ahead. I don't know if this was just me, but regardless, I found it to be a welcome addition. The Duke caused some controversy when he was first showing up to the public, you know, because he's grotesquely overweight. I highly doubt Capcom's intentions were to make fun of overweight people here, so we should leave that where it is. And honestly, if that were their intentions, they probably would have quickly changed the Duke and swept it under the rug. Really and truly, the Duke just makes me want to lift up that belly, crawl under, and take a nap. All the while, all my problems will slowly drift away as I'm cocooned in his sheer mass. He really is one of your greatest allies in this game. No, he is your greatest ally. Sure, without giving away too much, there is a redemption arc with Chris near the end, but through and through, the Duke has your back. But we never really learn who or what he is. There are theories that he is the fifth child of Miranda, and that may very well be true, but at the end of the day, all he really is to the player is a merchant. And I love the fact you have someone in a save room that can upgrade your gear and help you get kitted out for the next part of the game. The Duke is this sort of anti hero in the story because he clearly knows more than he is telling you, and if he wanted, he could stop being so cryptic and guide Ethan a little better. But until the very end of the game, he is there to serve you what you need. It's not uncommon to find weapon attachments scattered around the map in Resident Evil games, but here you can buy them from the Duke as well. He'll also sell you new weapons, and what is probably the most important, weapon upgrades. You collect a currency called I don't know how you pronounce it, from exploring, selling treasures to the Duke, and killing enemies, and you can spend it in his shop on weapon upgrades. These are really fun to acquire throughout the game, and especially when you're on like your third playthrough, because the upgrades carry between playthroughs, so you're just progressively getting more and more powerful as you keep replaying the game. And while I'm talking about gameplay, I should include that this game is replayable with a capital R. All Resi games are, and they often incentivize you to keep coming back to them with wacky guns and the aforementioned fact that things carry over between saves. I look forward to a few more Resident Evil 8 playthroughs, and I know when I speedrun it for this video's footage, I'll have a blast. Alright, so I've gone through the differences, some of the new stuff. How does combat feel in this installment? I played on PS5, and you might know where I'm going with this if you've also played on PS5. Capcom made full use of the adaptive triggers on that DualSense controller, and my verdict is I'm pretty pleased with how they did it. It's a little hard to explain, but in a nutshell, every gun has a different feel, and the different feel makes a lot of sense. A pistol will have a little bit of resistance when you're fully pulling on the trigger, and for a slower firing pistol, you will physically be pulling the trigger in slower, and the vibration feedback matches the gun. Like I said, this is hard to explain without you having a controller in your hands. The shotgun is a much more resistive press, and the vibration feedback is much deeper, like a heavier weapon has been fired. The machine gun is an absolute hair trigger weapon. The slightest press will start firing, and the vibration will be rapid. Something I found myself doing quite often on the guns that allowed it was when I was lining up my shot, I would rest my finger on the trigger lightly, and I'd find the point of pressure. So some of it was pressed in, and then as soon as my shot was lined up where I wanted it to be, I would push it in the rest of the way. I found myself doing this the most with the sniper rifle. You can't knock what Sony has given developers with the DualSense's triggers and haptic feedback, and when devs want to implement it and do it properly, it adds a level of immersion that you aren't getting on other platforms, and that's the bottom line. The actual combat gameplay is fantastic, and I mean it. You need to think about your shots carefully and obviously go for those headshots. It's what you've come to expect with the recent Resi games, pretty much all Resi games, so naturally that makes it really, really good. I mentioned it earlier, bullets aren't as scarce as they used to be, but that doesn't mean you can go around wasting ammo. Every shot counts, and in tense situations where there are 4 or 5 enemies coming for you at once, it's important you keep your cool and land those headshots. The different enemies you encounter keep things fresh too. Traditionally, Resident Evil is zombies and some other monsters, but it's never really dipped its toes into some more traditional monsters. In the Romanian village, you'll find lycans, essentially werewolves. Then you've got vampires. Lady Dimitrescu is obviously a vampire, but if you look into her lore, is she really? The too long didn't read is that Lady Miranda or Mother Miranda chose the 4 people to be her children and wanted to see what the same mold from Resident Evil 7 would do to these children, although I'm pretty sure they were adults when she did it. What the mold did to Lady D was it made her really tall, gave her basically Wolverine regeneration and the ability to extend her fingernails into long, sharp blades. I'm pretty sure they just copied Wolverine. It also made her enjoy the taste of blood, and that's where you get the gothic vampire lady. Her 3 vampire daughters are actually bugs that form the appearance of humans, and well, let's move on from them 4 because they've already been making the rounds on the internet enough. I won't get into the controversy surrounding the factory section's robot enemies because I do see a resemblance, but I don't think Capcom really copied that movie that much, at least not to the extent people are saying, and also because, surprise, surprise, I couldn't care less. I'm in the park that I didn't care for these enemies, but don't get it twisted, as much as I love this game, I just don't care for the factory section all that much. No other enemy types come to mind, there's a chance I'm forgetting some, but I'm sure you get the picture. This would be the part of the video where I talk about bosses as well, but they're best kept spoiler free, and good god, we've been talking about gameplay for a long time now, haven't we? I feel inclined to bring up puzzles as this is a Resident Evil game, but there really aren't that many at all. Obviously, they are there, but they're kind of watered down, so there's not much point including them. There's actually one huge part of the gameplay that I almost forgot to include in my script. If there was ever a Resi game to feel in the slightest way like an RPG, or that it has RPG mechanics, it's this one. And it comes to the open nature of the map. Sure, there is quite a bit to the Baker house, but it's all closed in and feels like, well, a house. The village with its surrounding areas feels like this pseudo open world game that has lots of things to discover that almost feel like side quests. I'll give you an example. I've fully explored this map, which not everyone does, and there are hidden areas that you could really easily brush over if you're just going for the main story, just like an RPG. There was even this house I found in the village that had a note on the door saying the key was being kept by Beneviento's gardener. So that got stored in my subconscious list of things to do and to be searching for while combing the entire map. The gardener's house doesn't open up until you've been to Beneviento's part of the game, and then you find this little key with an instrument on it that matches the door of the aforementioned house. Finding this key and bringing it to that house honestly felt like a little side quest, and it's something I know not everyone who picks up Resident Evil 8 will experience, and that's why it's interesting to me. While exploring the map, I found little areas, and I don't want to give away too much, But if the lore of this game, and I guess 7 because they're really connected, interests you, then I insist you go everywhere on the map because it's a Resident Evil game. There's little notes left everywhere that fill things in for you. And there are definitely some interesting surprises that otherwise you're going to miss out on. Even the fact to upgrade your overall health and defense and speed, stuff like that, you have to go find animals to kill and bring the ingredients to the Duke so he can cook for you. That feels fetch questy almost, like an RPG, and I love it. I didn't really expect the gameplay part of this video to span out the first 4 pages of my script, but here we are. We still need to talk about the horror, or their lack of. I already let you know this is more thriller than horror, but there's definitely horror here, and if you've played the game, these two words are sure to resonate with you. Dollhouse. Yes, Beneviento, the second house or child of Miranda you encounter, this part of the game terrified me, but I know exactly why. When I was a child, I was terrified of the thought of a Chucky doll. I had never seen the movies, but a kid in my class told me about Chucky, and that honestly scarred me. I'm not even sure why, but that fear was instilled in me and has continued to be there my whole life. The actual Chucky doll doesn't even scare me anymore. I can look at it and feel nothing, but deep down, that childlike fear is still there. Something that does get that fear going is that Annabelle doll from the Conjuring films, but my curtains aren't drawn while I'm writing the script, and it's dark outside, so I'm not even going to go there. The dollhouse section of the game brought up that childhood fear, and yeah, it scared the life out of me. That demon baby thing, terrifying. That Mia doll has the exact features creepy dolls need to have to freak me out. The Beneviento doll herself, no, I'm not kidding. These are some deeply engraved issues right here that Resident Evil can pull from the deepest, sourest corners of my psyche. And you know what? I love it because it means it's doing its job as a horror game, and I'm getting what I signed up for and paid for. I'm not joking either. I broke out into a sweat when doing this part of the game for the first time, and I checked my watch. My heart rate shot up too, all from the threat of being frightened by that doll, which when I was initially introduced to, it didn't really scare me because it looks like something out of a Tim Burton film, but this is one section of the game where you are basically left completely defenseless. All your weapons are taken off you, and that's a huge part of where the pure terror stems from. And also, ray tracing really did a number on me here because of its realistic shadows, because I thought the shadow of the staircase banister in that Beneviento house was the shadow of a doll from up above. That's how paranoid I got. I thought the shadows were watching me when I was playing Resident Evil 8. Another part which really had me scared to progress was in Lady D's castle, when she essentially had that Mr. X AI from the remake of 2, where you are always being followed. And those heavy footsteps echo throughout the halls of the castle, especially if you've got a good pair of headphones or earphones plugged into whatever you're playing the game on. The final part of gameplay that needs to be talked about is the isolated feeling you'll get when exploring. And when you are on your first playthrough and genuinely are just roaming the halls of Lady D's castle, or you're doing stuff that I said feels like side quests, when you aren't being attacked, you really do get this feeling of being alone and I guess being on the losing team. These peaceful moments are few and far between, but they're worth pointing out just because they add to the game's atmosphere. Let's stay on that page for a second because for this game to succeed at what it is trying to do, it needs to convey a whole range of atmospheres or emotions and present them on a tiny silver platter for us over entitled gamers to gobble up like little piggies ready for slaughter. Does it succeed? Yeah, but that's best experienced for yourself, and I'll explain. The atmosphere you get from something could be completely different to the feelings I get. I got a wide range of feelings from isolation to terror to a strange serenity, and I'm sure many of you will too. It's amazing what some of these games can make us feel and how varied those atmospheres given to us can be. Like, I've never been scared playing Sackboy: A Big Adventure, despite it having that big Peggy 18 on the front of the box. I always get this super upbeat feeling from that game, except when I want to tear my hair out and punch Sackboy in his perfect woolen face. I never get scared playing Demon Souls, but I do find the atmosphere of that game to be intense and adrenaline filled, while also making me feel calm. But that's a different topic for a different day. Excluding, I guess, happy and upbeat, because believe you me, I guess apart from the first 5 minutes, nothing about Resident Evil 8 is happy and upbeat. This game offers a little bit of everything when it comes to atmospheres, and I love that. Not every game can do that, but just like in Resident Evil 7, Capcom have been able to pull it off. I haven't done a video in this style on a PS5 game yet, only PS4 Pro and PC titles, so it is exciting to finally talk about how great a next-gen game looks. I know the PS5 has been out for 6 months already, but in my head it is still next-gen. I played through Resident Evil 8 with ray tracing turned on, as I would imagine most other people will play through the game. The visual effects here really show off two things. We're at the point of the console lifecycle where our games are being held back by the necessity that is them running on last gen. And the second thing is the RE engine, even without being used to its full potential on these platforms, still looks amazing. I mean, I've already had a taste for how this engine looks on PS5 with Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, but only briefly because I've been playing that game for the most part at 1080p ray tracing off, but in 120Hz mode. Resident Evil 8 was my first real look into how good this engine is, and I'm nothing short of impressed. You can tell, and this is a trend I'm starting to see with these early ray tracing games, they really want you to see how the lighting looks in this game. Early on in Lady D's castle, you have this sort of puzzle where you have to push these hanging baskets of fire so they can open a door for you. And of course, you have that amazing technical showcase that we saw in the maiden teaser demo of the chandelier in the main area of Lady D's castle and how the light reflects on the polished wood. Then just all the gold reflective decor in the castle. It looks amazing. The other areas of the game don't really show off the ray tracing quite as much, but it is always there and it is always adding to how good it looks. As I've said, I played on PS5, but graphically the game is pretty similar on Series X, and if your PC's GPU supports ray tracing, or you have a Series S, or you're playing on Stadia for some reason, you'll get ray tracing and you can see it in action. The game looks amazing in 4K too. Everything is really crisp and clear. I'm playing Resident Evil 7, which is still a good looking game, back to back with 8. The differences are night and day. Performance, however, isn't just as perfect. Now, when you have ray tracing turned on, this applies to both PS5 and Series X, the game targets 45 FPS. Notice how I say targets, which honestly to me is fine. Like if I turn on a game and it's 30 FPS and I've only ever seen it in 30 FPS, then that is what my brain expects. And I'm not the type of person that complains about frames. Clearly 60 is better and smoother, and if it's there I'd like it, but unless it's high refresh rate gameplay like 120Hz, I personally don't mind sacrificing frames for graphics, especially in a more story-oriented game. However, I did notice there were frame dips at times in this game, not constant and not really that often, but it was enough for me to notice, and I felt it was worth pointing out. I think this performance hit is due to ray tracing though. I'd imagine it's a smooth 60 frames on the mode where ray tracing is switched off. And I think until the new consoles get AMD's upscaling tech, this may be a trend, but the floodgates for 4K 60 ray tracing will hopefully open up when they do get that tech. This has been a long one, so thank you for sticking around until the end, if you actually have. I know uploads have been pretty scarce as of late, but hopefully I'm going to try and get back into the swing of things going forwards. I have a MacBook now with Final Cut Pro and Logic, so hopefully production will get a higher quality level once I actually learn how to use the programs. They are kind of complicated, and I'm also going to try and upgrade my microphone to an Audio-Technica one soon within the next few weeks. I've been working a lot lately, so having the time for videos is a bit tricky, but I'm going to become a caffeine addict to make videos in my spare time. The 1-year anniversary of the channel is coming up, which is what drove me to get this video wrapped up, and I'm hoping to push out one more video before that anniversary on June 12th, but we'll have to see. I always have good intentions. I have some interesting stuff in the works though, so look forward to that, and I don't ever talk about the channel in these videos, but I thought it would be nice considering we're at the end of my unplanned break. And if you're wondering what's coming soon, well,